Imagine receiving a medal from Adolf Hitler himself, the Iron Cross, Nazi Germany's highest military honor. Now imagine also receiving a medal from King George VI of Britain, the member of the Order of the British Empire. Both awards, same war, same man. This is the true story of Juan Pujol García, a Spanish chicken farmer who never fired a single shot in World War II, but who may have saved thousands of lives on D-Day. With nothing but his imagination, a few library books, and an extraordinary talent for lying, he became history's most successful double agent, codename Garbo, and the Nazis never knew they'd been fooled. Juan Pujol García was born in Barcelona, Spain on February 14, 1912, into a middle-class family with liberal political beliefs. By most accounts, he was a dreamer, the kind of child who crashed his tricycle through plate glass windows while acting out adventures from his imagination. That imagination, he would later say, controlled his brain, and it cursed him throughout his early life. He wasn't particularly successful at anything. He studied at the Royal Poultry School in Arenys de Mar, yes, that's a real thing, and became a chicken farmer. He tried his hand at managing a cinema. He ran a small hotel. Nothing stuck. In 1931, he did his compulsory military service in the Spanish cavalry, where he discovered he was terrible at soldiering. He hated horse riding and admitted he lacked what he called the essential qualities of loyalty, generosity, and honor required for military life. He paid his way out after just 6 months. Then came the Spanish Civil War, starting in 1936. Pujol was managing a chicken farm when he was called up to fight for the Republican forces, but he didn't want to fight, not for anyone. His family had suffered under the Republicans. His sister's fiancé had been arrested, accused of being counter-revolutionary. His mother and sister were captured too. The experience left him with a deep hatred of extremism on both sides, communism and fascism alike. So Pujol did something audacious. He hid. For 2 years he stayed in his girlfriend's house. When he was finally discovered and arrested, he managed to escape. Then, to avoid further persecution, he switched sides and briefly joined Franco's nationalist forces. According to his own testimony, he managed to fight on both sides of the Spanish Civil War without ever firing a single bullet for either. By the time the war ended in 1939, Juan Pujol García had developed a very clear worldview. He despised totalitarianism in all its forms, and he particularly loathed the Nazis. When World War II erupted and Britain stood alone against the Axis powers, Pujol felt a calling. He wanted to contribute, as he put it, for the good of humanity. But he knew he couldn't fight with a weapon, so he decided to fight with something else, his imagination. In January 1941, Juan Pujol García approached the British Embassy in Madrid and offered his services as a spy. They turned him down. He tried again in Lisbon, rejected. A third time through his wife Araceli, still no. To the British, he was nobody, a failed chicken farmer with no connections, no credentials, and no apparent value. But Pujol was not easily discouraged. If the British wouldn't take him seriously, he would build himself a resume, and to do that, he would need to work for the Germans first. Pujol studied Nazi ideology just enough to fake being a fanatic. He crafted a false identity, a pro-Nazi Spanish government official who frequently traveled to London on diplomatic business and who wanted to serve the Führer's cause. To make himself credible, he even tricked a printer in Lisbon into creating a fake Spanish diplomatic passport, using photos he'd secretly taken of a real diplomat's visa at a hotel. Armed with this fabricated identity, Pujol approached the German military intelligence service, the Abwehr, in Madrid. After some hesitation, they believed him.
They gave him a crash course in espionage, secret writing, invisible ink, codes, along with 600 British pounds and instructions to travel to Britain and recruit a network of spies.
There was just one problem. Pujol spoke almost no English, and he was terrified of being caught by British authorities. So he never went to Britain at all. Instead, he moved to Lisbon, Portugal, and began one of history's boldest con jobs. From a hotel room in Lisbon, Pujol set about creating the illusion that he was operating inside Britain. He went to public libraries and newsstands. He bought tourist guidebooks like the Blue Guide to England, shipping timetables, British magazines and newspapers. He studied maps. He listened to BBC radio broadcasts. And from this publicly available information, he began crafting detailed intelligence reports to send to his German handlers in Madrid. The reports described British troop movements, convoy departures, military installations, all completely invented. To make them believable, Pujol created an entire network of fictional sub-agents. There was Agent 1, a Dutch airline pilot who supposedly smuggled letters between London and Lisbon. Agent 4, a Gibraltarian waiter who eavesdropped on diplomats at fancy restaurants. A Venezuelan student in Glasgow. A disgruntled British Army sergeant willing to sell secrets. By the end, he had 27 imaginary people working for him, each with their own background story. The Germans bought it completely. They sent him money, lots of it. Over the course of the war, they would pay him the equivalent of $6 million in today's currency to support his non-existent spy ring. Of course, Pujol made mistakes. He once reported that men in Glasgow would do anything for a liter of wine, not realizing that Scots prefer whiskey. He got British currency conversions wrong. He confused the metric system. But whenever the Germans questioned something, Pujol blamed one of his imaginary agents for the error. His most brilliant early trick involved a completely fictitious British convoy. He told the Germans that a large fleet was gathering in Malta, preparing for operations. German forces scrambled to respond. Resources were diverted. Ships were redeployed. The convoy, of course, didn't exist. But the Germans' reaction told British intelligence something important. Someone was feeding the Germans fake intelligence, and the Germans trusted it. That's when MI5 and MI6 finally took notice. In early 1942, British intelligence officers pieced together that the misinformation flooding German intelligence from Alaric, Pujol's German codename, was coming from someone in Lisbon who had never actually set foot in Britain. Using decrypted German communications from Bletchley Park, they realized this mystery agent was extraordinarily convincing, and they wanted him. Through a contact with U.S. naval intelligence in Lisbon and further vetting by MI6 officer Desmond Bristow, Pujol was finally brought to Britain in April 1942. He arrived in Plymouth aboard a military transport and was immediately taken to London for debriefing. The British gave him a new code name, Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, because he was the best actor in the world. Pujol was assigned a handler named Tomás Harris, a half-Spanish MI5 officer who spoke fluent Spanish. The partnership between Harris and Pujol would become legendary. As the official history of British intelligence in World War II describes it, this was one of those rare partnerships between two exceptionally gifted men whose inventive genius inspired and complemented each other. Together, they took Pujol's imaginary spy network and expanded it into a full-scale deception machine. They refined each fictional agent's identity. They gave them jobs, addresses, personalities, quirks. They created fake correspondence. When one imaginary agent supposedly died, British newspapers published obituaries, and MI5 arranged for the Germans to send condolence money to his fictional widow, real money for a person who never existed.
Harris and Pujol communicated with the Germans first through handwritten letters using secret ink mailed through neutral Lisbon. Later, to speed things up, they invented a fictional radio operator to send encrypted messages directly to Madrid. This gave British codebreakers at Bletchley Park an additional gift, because they knew the original text of Garbo's messages and could intercept the re-encrypted versions sent from Madrid to Berlin using Enigma machines. They had perfect material for cracking German codes. Between 1942 and 1944, Pujol and Harris wrote 315 letters to the Germans, averaging 2,000 words each. The style was deliberately verbose and fanatical, full of Nazi rhetoric and praise for the Führer's New World Order. According to the official history, the Germans became so overwhelmed with information from Garbo's network that they stopped trying to recruit any other spies inside Britain. They thought they already had the best. But the information was carefully controlled. It was a mix of three types: complete fiction, genuine but useless facts, and valuable intelligence that always arrived too late to matter. For example, in November 1942, just before Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, Garbo sent a letter warning the Germans about troop convoys leaving Britain for the Mediterranean. The letter was postmarked before the landings, but deliberately delayed in the mail so it arrived after the invasion had already begun. The Germans replied, "We are sorry your reports arrived too late, but they were magnificent." This built Garbo's credibility to the point where German intelligence trusted him completely. And that trust would prove essential for the greatest deception of the war. By early 1944, everyone knew the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe was coming. The question wasn't if, but where and when. Adolf Hitler himself believed the main attack would come at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest part of the English Channel, only 21 miles from Dover. It was the most logical choice, the shortest route across dangerous waters, the quickest path into Germany, and it had good harbors at Calais, Dunkirk, and Boulogne. The Allies intended to land in Normandy instead, but they needed the Germans to keep believing in Calais. Enter Operation Fortitude, the most elaborate military deception in history, designed to mislead the German High Command about the location, timing, and scale of D-Day. And at the heart of Fortitude was Garbo. The Allies created an entirely fictitious army, the first United States Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly stationed in southeastern England under the command of General George S. Patton, one of the most feared Allied commanders. Garbo's imaginary agents reported constant activity around FUSAG. Meanwhile, in the real world, the British deployed inflatable tanks, fake airfields, dummy landing craft, and false radio traffic to make FUSAG look real. They even had actors playing General Patton making public appearances in the southeast. Between January and June 1944, Garbo sent more than 500 radio messages to the Germans, sometimes more than 20 transmissions in a single day. He described troop movements, equipment stockpiles, embarkation preparations. All of it pointed to Calais. Then came the critical moment. On June 5th, the day before D-Day, Garbo sent a message to his handlers saying he would transmit urgent intelligence at 3 a.m. on June 6th, intelligence about where the invasion fleet was headed. But when the scheduled time came, there was no one at the German radio station in Madrid to receive it. Whether this was deliberate on the British side or an actual German mistake remains debated by historians, but the result was the same. Garbo's warning about Normandy arrived too late, after the landings had already begun. Garbo was furious, or at least he played the part brilliantly. He sent an angry message to Berlin. "I am very disgusted. I cannot accept excuses or negligence. I cannot swallow the idea of endangering this work without any benefit. Were it not for my ideals and my faith, I would abandon this work as having proven myself a failure." This outburst had the intended effect. It convinced the Germans that Garbo had tried to warn them but had been let down by their own incompetence. His credibility, already high, became unshakable. 3 days later, on June 9th, D-Day +3, Garbo sent what may have been the most important intelligence message of the entire war. It was long, detailed, and marked urgent for the German High Command. In it, Garbo reported that he had met with his top agents and reviewed the overall situation. He presented an order of battle showing 75 Allied divisions in Britain. In reality, there were only about 50. He pointed out that the powerful FUSAG with 11 divisions under Patton had not yet moved from southeastern England.
His conclusion: The Normandy landings were a diversion. The real invasion, the main blow, was still coming at the Pas de Calais. The Germans believed him completely. A message sent from Berlin 2 days later stated, "All reports received in the last week from the Arabelle network have been confirmed without exception and are to be described as especially valuable." Throughout July and August 1944, German forces kept 2 armored divisions and 19 infantry divisions, well over 100,000 troops, sitting in the Pas de Calais area, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander-in-chief in the West, even overruled a proposal from Field Marshal Erwin Rommel to move those units to Normandy to reinforce the defense there. Historians debate exactly how decisive Garbo's role was, but there's broad consensus on this. Had those German divisions been moved to Normandy in the first weeks after D-Day, they could have tipped the balance. The Allied beachhead was fragile. Those extra troops might have pushed the invasion back into the sea. Instead, they stayed in Calais, waiting for an attack that existed only in Juan Pujol's imagination. On July 29, 1944, Juan Pujol received a radio message from Berlin. He had been awarded the Iron Cross Second Class, one of Nazi Germany's highest military honors, for his extraordinary services to the German war effort. The award normally required Adolf Hitler's personal authorization and was reserved for front-line fighting men. Pujol and Harris sent back a humble message of thanks, expressing how unworthy he was of such an honor. In December 1944, in a private ceremony at MI5 headquarters, Pujol was awarded the Member of the Order of the British Empire by King George VI. The ceremony was kept secret. His name didn't appear in the London Gazette, as was customary, because the British wanted to protect the methods of their double-cross system. The medal was presented by Sir David Petrie, the Director General of MI5. Pujol had prepared a little speech. When it was over, his colleagues banged on the table in congratulations. He later described it as a very moving moment. Juan Pujol had achieved something almost no one else in history ever has. He received military decorations from both sides of the same war. The only other person known to have done this was another British double agent named Eddie Chapman. The crucial difference: the Germans never realized they'd been deceived by Pujol. After the war ended, Juan Pujol continued working briefly for MI5, helping to investigate whether Nazi networks were planning any kind of post-war resistance or Fourth Reich activities. But he was increasingly worried about reprisals. Surviving Nazi officers might seek revenge if they discovered his role. So, in 1949, with MI5's help, Juan Pujol García staged his own death. He traveled to Angola and spread the story that he had died there of malaria. British officials confirmed the death to Spanish authorities. His wife Araceli and their 3 children, Juan, George, and Maria Eugenia, were told he was dead. Obituaries were filed. For all intents and purposes, Garbo ceased to exist. In reality, Pujol had moved to Venezuela. He settled first in Luganias, then later in Caracas. He worked as a language teacher for Shell Oil, then ran a small bookstore and gift shop. He eventually divorced Araceli, who apparently suspected he might still be alive, and remarried a woman named Carmen Cilia, with whom he had 3 more children. For 35 years, Juan Pujol García lived in quiet anonymity in South America. The world knew nothing of Garbo. The story of the double-cross system remained classified. Even most historians didn't know the full extent of what had been accomplished.
That changed in the early 1980s when British writer Nigel West, the pen name of Rupert Allison, a former member of Parliament, became intrigued by references to Agent Garbo in declassified documents. After years of research and interviewing former intelligence officers, West theorized that Garbo might still be alive. He hired a research assistant who called every J. Garcia in the Barcelona phone book, an extremely common name, until they found Pujol's nephew. In May 1984, West and Pujol finally met in New Orleans. They collaborated on Pujol's autobiography, Operation Garbo, published in 1985. At West's urging, Pujol returned to Europe. He had an unusually long private audience with Prince Philip at Buckingham Palace. He visited the Special Forces Club in London and was reunited with his former colleagues, including his handler Thomas Harris's associates. Roger Fleetwood Hesketh, Cyril Mills, and Desmond Bristow were all there. On June 6, 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day, Pujol traveled to Normandy. He toured the beaches where the invasion had taken place. He met veterans of the battle who lined up to thank him and shake his hand. But when he visited the graves of the soldiers who had died during the landings, Pujol wept. He said simply, "I didn't do enough." Juan Pujol García died on August 10, 1988, in Caracas, Venezuela, from complications of a stroke. He was 76 years old. He is buried in Chironi, a small coastal town inside Henri Pittier National Park by the Caribbean Sea. His gravestone reads simply, Juan Pujol García, 1402-1912, 10-10-1988. Remembered by. Juan Pujol García never commanded an army. He never flew a bomber, never stormed a beach, never fired a rifle in combat. He was a failed chicken farmer with an overactive imagination who couldn't even ride a horse properly. And yet, his lies may have saved thousands of lives. D-Day was the largest amphibious invasion in human history. It was also one of the most precarious. If those 19 German infantry divisions and 2 armored divisions had been moved from Calais to Normandy in June 1944, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The Allied forces establishing their beachhead were vulnerable. Every hour they had to consolidate their position mattered, and for crucial weeks, the German High Command hesitated, paralyzed by the belief that the real attack was still coming somewhere else because a Spanish hotel manager in London told them so. This is the power of information in modern warfare. It's not always about firepower or troop numbers. Sometimes it's about what the enemy believes, and belief can be shaped. The mind is a battlefield, too. There's also a moral complexity here worth considering. Juan Pujol fought evil with deception. He lied constantly and elaborately for years. He manipulated people, even created fake deaths, all to serve a greater cause. Espionage operates in a shadow world where the usual rules don't quite apply, where good people do morally ambiguous things in service of defeating something worse. Pujol lived a double life so convincingly that even his own children believed he was dead for decades. The psychological pressure of that, the isolation, the secrecy, the constant performance must have been enormous. When he finally returned to Normandy in 1984 and wept at the graves of fallen soldiers, saying he didn't do enough, you glimpse the burden he carried. We remember D-Day for the soldiers on the beaches, the paratroopers in the night sky, the ships on the horizon. We remember the generals, the presidents, the grand strategy. But behind those headlines, in the unseen rooms of intelligence services, in anonymous hotel rooms and small offices, individuals like Juan Pujol waged their own kind of war. A war of words and reports and fabricated agents. A war fought with typewriters and invisible ink. History turns on moments. D-Day was one of them. And D-Day turned, in part, on the lies of a man named Garbo. So the next time you read about a turning point in history, ask yourself, who were the unseen hands? Who shaped the information? Who whispered into the right ears?
Who moved in the shadows to make the visible events possible? Because for every general on a battlefield, there's often a spy in a back room weaving a story that changes everything. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more about the hidden intelligence operations of World War II, let me know in the comments below.